Well, we're at a dozen folks and it's 12:02, so I think we'll go ahead and get started. I'm John Samet, the interim chair of the Department of Environmental and Occupational Health, and I also chaired the search committee that led the most recent search for the next chair. I'm pleased to introduce Beth Carlton, who I think is probably known to well by everybody participating today. Beth has been a faculty member since 2013 and is a professor in the department. I think, as many of you know, engaged in a variety of research projects related to the environment and infectious diseases, infectious disease modeling, and strong interest in climate and its overlay with health. So Beth, I'll turn things to you. And for those online, Beth will be doing a brief presentation. And then after that, we will have an opportunity to have a conversation with Beth. And what I'll ask you to do is just use the raise hand function and we'll go through your comments and thoughts. So Beth, please go ahead.
Thanks, John, and thanks so much for all who are here and for the invitation to be here today. John mentioned I'll speak for about 10 minutes and then I'm happy to have a conversation. So I thought, since it is the end of exam week, we can start with a quiz. And this is the quiz we had on the question I had in my job talk last time. But I want to spend a few minutes on kind of what I see as the field of environmental and occupational health. And the question for you all is whether it is a multidisciplinary topic-driven field, a methods-driven field suited to assessing complex health challenges, or both A and B. And what I would like to convince you of is that it is three, both A and B. It's always three, right? So I think EOH includes both foundational methods, and this is a schematic showing my conceptualization of what the foundational methods in EOH include. This ranges from toxicology, which is work at the cellular, even the molecular level to understand the mechanisms of harm. Exposure assessment, which can involve environmental monitoring, all the way down to monitoring of toxicants in the body and components like DNA adducts that show signs of exposure, historical over the course of a lifetime. Environmental and occupational epidemiology, which is primarily where I sit, thinking about the links between exposures and health outcomes and how we design studies to understand those associations using population level data, either primary or secondary. Risk assessment, which is really a synthesis of the evidence from these other three pieces to come up with metrics and systems for classifying risks of different toxicants and looking at things like disproportionate risks across our society. And lastly, policy and implementation, which is really about translating the evidence from these other three pieces, as well as across other disciplines, into policy that reduces environmental harms and promotes healthy populations, including healthy workers. I think there's lots of really interesting work in the policy space, including looking at how different policies can impact health. Additionally, environmental occupational health scientists grapple with the complex health challenges of our time. Not least among them is climate change, what many have called the existential crisis of our generation. And there's all sorts of really fascinating work happening in our department around climate and health, from work in Guatemala, trying to understand this complex interplay of heat, extreme exertion by sugarcane workers and chronic kidney disease, work in the San Luis Valley, trying to understand the relationship between drought and metals exposure. Really nice work being done to try to start to listen and understand community perceptions around climate and environmental exposures. Work from my team trying to understand the relationships between communicable diseases and climate change. And then, of course, the very exciting PhD in climate and health that was launched recently. We'll be starting a new cohort, the first cohort in fall. Additionally, in EOH, the content expertise or our ability to respond to crises is not limited to climate change. In fact, our department has shown this incredible ability to respond to emerging health crises, such as trying to understand what PFAS, or per and polyfluoroalkyl substances, mean for human health when we found high levels of exposure, particularly in the Fort Collins region. And of course, there's the next emerging challenge that has lots of overlay with the types of skills we have in EOH. Highly pathogenic avian influenza has now been detected, not just in birds, but in livestock, particularly cattle, and in a limited number of people. So to be clear, we think the virus is still in this stage of stuttering transmission. So we're seeing these spillover events into mammalian populations. But this raises all sorts of questions about what type of personal protective equipment should be recommended, and how do we advocate for safe workspaces among populations working in the cattle industry who are often highly marginalized. What does exposure to H5N1 look like? What are the most relevant routes of exposure? All of these are things that people in our department and people in EOH are well suited to answer. Okay, so I also want to say a little bit about my vision for the department if I were to become chair. It's really split into three pieces. One is growing the educational mission through national leadership, primarily in climate and health education, and we're on our way in that direction with the new PhD in climate and health. We talk a little bit about how we might build further leadership in that area. Two is to foster leadership in research and research to practice that's responsive to 21st century health challenges, climate change being key among those, but building the agility and the diversity of faculty to be able to respond to other emerging health crises as well. And lastly, building a well-managed and financially stable department that is really helping faculty, staff, and students to thrive. So I say a little bit about each of these pieces, and I'm happy to go in depth on any of these issues further as we have the Q&A. But in terms of leadership in education and climate and health, I want to think a little bit about where we could be 5 years from now. I think we all have appetite for expanded student enrollment in our graduate programs. Adding an MS to the PhD in climate health seems like a logical next step that allows us to build complementary curriculum. I think there is a large appetite right now to look at our curriculum and ensure it is meeting the needs of our students. Ideally, 5 years from now or even sooner, we have a really innovative curriculum that teaches core EOH skills, grounded in real-world examples, to build expertise in climate and health and other emerging EOH challenges. One of the things I've talked to several faculty members about is a real appetite for practice-based learning experiences that can give students experiences in our communities and also help to build our schools network into communities across Colorado and the Rocky Mountain region, and also address student needs for financial support if we can find scholarships to pair these practice learning experiences with strategic scholarships. Lastly, I think there's an opportunity to become a source of trainings for the Colorado and Rocky Mountain region workforce to address climate change. There is particularly the health impacts of climate change. There's a huge workforce that is being asked to respond, many of whom were trained a decade or more ago. And ultimately having a set of graduates who have the expertise and nimbleness such that they can respond to climate and health and other emerging environmental and occupational health challenges. Okay, so a little more on leadership in research and research to practice in climate health. 5 years from now, we could be a national leader in defining the health impacts of climate change, identifying disproportionately impacted communities, and rigorously evaluating adaptation and mitigation measures. I think we are well on our way in this direction. And to get there, I think it will require really strong support for faculty to be creative and bold in creating and supplementing existing research programs, as well as recruiting, doing some strategic hires. I think I would love us to be able to continue our strong history of responding to emerging environmental and occupational health challenges, and in ways that is rigorous and impactful. I think our department does a really nice job of bridging science to practice, and continuing that would be grand. And then I think there's potential to build centers, namely a Center for Climate and Health, or other collaborative centers that really can help build research infrastructure such as data cores, exposure science cores, and provide training opportunities for students. We sit in Colorado surrounded by a wealth of scientific talent, including at the other universities and federal agencies. And ideally, we are leveraging that network of talent in our research and training. Okay, and lastly, and kind of least glamorously, how do we continue to run a well-managed, financially stable department? And I will borrow the term that Dr. Schwatka used during the faculty retreat of really thinking about how do we create environments where people can thrive. I think we have goals to recruit and retain a student body, a staff, and a faculty that reflects the diversity of the populations we serve. And I think that is possible and something we can invest in. I think communication and engagement plans that showcase our work, increase impact, and draw new talent to our schools will be central to building that student pipeline and also potentially a donor pipeline. We have a growing EOH alumni network, and we also have an external advisory board. And I think we could engage with both of those in terms of student placements for practicum, in terms of future job networking ideas, in terms of potential donor cultivation. The other piece I'll mention is, I think there's appetite for greater transparency in our financial planning and making sure we have sustainability to weather, challenges in later years. And as I mentioned previously, I really think a well-managed department is nested within this web of collaborations for teaching, practice, and research that stretches across departments, across schools on our campus, and across Colorado and beyond. So I'll stop there. I'm happy to chat about any things that you may want to talk about within those pieces or other questions you may have. But thank you for listening.
Great. Thank you, Beth. And so for those who are with us today, again, Beth, why don't you stop sharing? And if you could go ahead and just use raise hand and but add your comments or questions for Beth. And I'll jump into the moment of silence, Beth, and just ask you, in terms of bringing new faculty, which of course would be important for the new chair, how would you see setting priorities for that for doing so?
Yeah, I think this is an important question, perhaps the most important question for an incoming chair. If you think about that breadth of expertise that we need in EOH, I think number one is thinking about what gaps we might have in that expertise and where we might build, where we might want to build. So do we want to hire an exposure scientist, for example, at the junior level to complement more senior folks in exposure science and ensure we have presence in exposure science in the long term. I think you can also think of topic-driven hires. So we could hire someone in climate and health that might fit into one or several of those parts of expertise. Certainly there is appetite for work on climate and health in our department, and that could synergize nicely with the work of other departments as well.
Okay, good. Thank you. And Lee, why don't you go ahead? Actually, I didn't see a hand raised. I'm not sure what's going on, but go ahead. And so if everybody can just see three of you lined up in chat, but Lee, why don't you go ahead? Oops. Huh. Um, can't let's see, we can't hear Lee. Let's see, Dan, I don't know, Seb, so the Lee's comment is the format of the meeting. There you are. Okay. Try now, Lee. Go ahead.
Great. Yeah, I don't know why we're using this format. It's tedious and we can't see each other and we can't collaborate.
Yeah, I don't know where this format came from, and I don't know whether they can change it. So we'll stick with where we are. Go ahead.
That's not my question. Beth, thank you for presenting the vision. And my first question is how do you think about growing this climate vision without leaving parts behind? We have, faculty who don't necessarily do climate-related research. What does it mean for the health of the department overall if we put a lot of our focus in climate, and who's left behind and what do we do there?
Yeah. So I think this is a really important question, one I've thought a lot about. I mean, I think in terms of the education vision, I think where we have room for growth is in the climate and health space. And I think we have a clear potential to exert national leadership in that education around climate and health. In the research, I think we need to maintain our MPH program, environmental and occupational health. So there is still need for faculty who can cover the breadth of expertise in EOH, including in issues that are not related, to climate and health. In terms of the research mission, I think what we really need to cultivate, and this is why I phrased that second aim that way, is a ability to respond to the existential challenges of our time, one of which is climate change, but it is not the only challenge. And I think that's why when we think about hiring new faculty, we need to think very carefully about how we hire, and are we hiring into topic areas of expertise, or are we hiring people who have the agility to like a set of real skills that can be applied at the moment to topic one, but in the future to topic two, right, as that problem emerges.
Thank you for that.
Okay, thanks.
Thanks for your question.
Now that I'm wised up about our format, I will read everything. Natalie has a comment. Thanks, Beth. Can you speak more to how you might want to plan for creating a place for all in EOH to thrive?
Thanks for this question, Natalie. Well, I will start by saying I am inspired to want this job by the talents of the faculty in EOH, faculty who know more about creating healthy and safe workplaces. So I will lean in part on the expertise of existing faculty, but to give you a more concrete answer, I think some of the things that help people thrive are a sense of stability, a sense that you can focus on your research, you can focus on your teaching, you can focus on your service, and not spend as much time worrying, for example, about the financial system, or to be, to stability, I feel like frees up brain space to think about important topics, to have clarity on what service expectations are, so that people can plan ahead and understand perhaps X% of my time is going to be spent on faculty senate or DAPCO or what have you, but I also have this other portion of my time that is really dedicated to my research. And similarly for teaching, if we can invest some time into thinking very strategically about our educational mission, our current curriculum, how to modernize it, I think within that is creating some stability for faculty in terms of, what courses they may teach now and in the future, what they may want to build, what they may want to maintain. So that would be one piece of it, but certainly were I to become chair, I would have I would welcome input from you and others.
From Tomas Janusz, can you speak to low-hanging fruit in terms of research across the departments in the school?
Yeah, there is a lot of low-hanging fruit. I mean, I think I'll speak to a few things that come to mind. Some of the really nice work on the Total Worker Health Program stretches across community behavioral health, mental health in the workplace, and in occupational health. I think there is certainly some of my work, some of that of Kathy James, is somewhere between epi, biostats, and EOH. I think there's potentials for synergies with the Center for Global Health for programs that are focused outside of the United States, such as the really tremendous work that's happening in Guatemala and in Mexico and in Asia around occupational health. So in terms of research collaborations, that's one piece. I think what's interesting that's happening at our school and is how we might collaborate in terms of curriculum across departments. We've been having a discussion about creating a course that's about environmental data collection, and how might that synergize with a course that is about data management or about data visualization and analysis? And can we create these easy wins that build curricular connections across the school that kind of play up each department's area of strength, but create a kind of unified or a complementary kind of set of curriculum for students.
Okay, from Ben, in terms of training, what do you see as the gaps that EOH students might have currently that should be filled? And going with that, and do you see cooperation across departments as a way to achieve that?
This is a great question. I see a huge appetite among our students. I'll just put in a shameless plug for Dr. Ellishouse's course that he's going to offer in the fall, which is for a second level GIS course, an advanced GIS and spatial statistics. I think this is a really good question. I think we need to be able as a department to answer this question by working with our external advisory board, working with our alumni, and really have a pulse on the answer to this question, not just now, but in the future as that answer may change. I think things we have heard is students needing more quantitative skills, and students needing some of the soft skills that were particularly challenging to develop in the early years of COVID when everyone was remote. So those are two pieces. We discussed as a faculty last week a desire for more ability, more training in risk assessment, whether that is something that all our graduates need or a subset of our graduates need, I think remains to be seen. But kind of as I mentioned in the earlier question, I really do think there are ways we could build curriculum that complements curriculum in other departments. I think the challenge, like to be real about some of the challenges, I think we all want slightly different things for our students sometimes. Like in my role as DRPH director, what we had wanted was an advanced statistics course that could serve the needs of doctoral students who are not going into biostatistics. It took a while to get there. Biostatistics eventually developed this really nice course, but for a while, there was this tension between wanting to serve the needs, asking biostats to help us with the DRPH program, and wanting to serve the needs of their own students. So I want to be real that this dance is not simple, but there are chances for overlap. In the end, biostats ended up creating two different courses, one for kind of the non-biostats doctoral students and one for the biostats. So.
And sort of a related question from Lily. Beth, can you speak to your approach for curriculum design and the potential need to constrict the number of courses? How will this impact exploring opportunities to pursue new programs?
Yeah, I think this is a great and challenging question, Lily. So thank you. I think there's a few different pieces to this. I think Ben's question is really relevant here. What are the skills we want our graduates to have when they are finished, and how to design a curriculum that builds those skills, and recognizing that we need both kind of a core and a set of electives. I do think one thing that EOH faculty has done well over the years is to really be innovative, both about the delivery formats of courses and the content of courses. And so I think we do need, but what also has happened is we have courses on the books that have not run. We have courses that are unpredictable as when they were run because of low enrollment. And so I think we're going to need to, as a faculty, be really purposeful about, as we build new curriculum, thinking about how that fits within the broader picture. If we build new programs, thinking about how we might draw students and ensure we're not taking students away from other programs. Being quite purposeful in how we add, like, we want to create this culture of innovation, but we also need to be realistic about the need to have bodies in classrooms, right?
Okay, let's see, a question from Lee. Faculty are all very busy already, and you might be able to add a few new faculty over a few years. We are experiencing a decrease in some near retiring faculty. Then here's the question: how do we create the bandwidth to teach all the courses, build curriculum, write the grants, be innovative, and preserve our well-being?
That's akin to Natalie's, how do we create a culture where we can thrive? I mean, I think this raises this point that we need to be clear about. If we hire, let's say, 3 assistant faculty over in the next few years, we may net add 0 to 1 faculty to the EOH department because of anticipated retirements and potential, stochastic departures if people find jobs elsewhere. So even doing the strategic hires within our department may still not grow our faculty much larger than it currently is. So I think this question is important. I mean, I think one is, this is where we need to take a careful look at our curriculum to understand what we can afford to offer, what we want, what is most important to us. I think, what is exciting is we have a new associate dean of research, and working with them to ensure we create the spaces to go after the big ambitious grants, even if that requires some seed money, and some faculty or staff time support. I think we would all love a space in the future for the school where we have greater coverage for base. So we just have a bit more breathing room. So I think it's all the things.
Okay, from Allison, do you think there's a possibility of collaboration with other schools, such as pharmacy for courses and more?
I mean, Allison, you have a great history. You probably understand the opportunities and challenges of working with pharmacy. I think what's interesting in terms of curriculum is that much as each department has slightly different desires for their students, each school has slightly different desires for their students. So, for example, my climate and health course that I built with Jay Lemery and Rosemary Rochford originally was intended to serve all. And ultimately it was decided there needed to be a separate piece at the School of Medicine, right? Because the students had different schedules. They didn't want to take a semester-long course, whereas we wanted semester. So it's not easy. The simplest way to build collaborations across schools is through guest lectures, through joint teaching, where one faculty may teach a course in another school. I certainly think it's interesting to think as we stretch into new teaching formats, such as short courses or hybrid formats where students may be on campus for 5 hours once a month, and then work remotely. Can that create spaces where we do have more potential for overlap and co-teaching and pulling in students across different schools on our campus?
Great, let's see. I'll throw in a question, and again, if there are those who want to add, please. There's another one from Lee, but I'll stick my question in here. You've had the opportunity to work with CDPHE, and I guess question from me is, what do you think the opportunities are, and how would you try and deepen connections, for example, with state and local public health? And certainly the department has a strong interest in application, but what do you see as the opportunities and approaches?
Yeah, thanks. And I think there are many in our department who have created working relationships with CDPHE and local health departments, for example, Broomfield Health Department. And I think these relationships are really important. I mean, from a kind of opportunistic standpoint, they can provide opportunities for research. You know, I always think our team has access to this unprecedented amount of data that we wouldn't have access to without this partnership. And that involves, you know, creating a lot of trust between these organizations. It also creates potential for student training. And I think this dialogue in many ways helps us work with people who ultimately may be employers of our students and understand kind of what their needs may be and what we should be offering in terms of curriculum. So I think you know, at the school level, the academic health department that has now been formalized provides a structure for some of, you know, potential to deepen relationship, both in terms of training and in research collaborations. I still think there's a lot to be worked out there in terms of what that means. But for example, Thomas Yanish and myself and others and Ned and Glenn are putting in a proposal to try to work with CDPHE on a Center for Public Health Preparedness and Response. So, you know, it's there. And I think in some ways having those connections between the agencies that are live creates the opportunity to be nimble when these kind of short-term calls come out for opportunity for funding.
Thank you. Let's see. Kathy asked, tell us your vision and plan for recruiting students and creating pipelines for growth in student enrollment. Yes.
Thanks, Kathy. Not an easy question, but certainly I think one of the key questions we need to be able to answer. You know, I think what was interesting to us is that the PhD in climate and health generated a huge amount of interest. And I think this ties to kind of Lily's earlier question, like their innovation, new programs do generate a level of excitement and interest that can serve to pull students in that we aren't currently serving. And that's where an MS in climate and health might also further invigorate our student pipeline. I had an interesting conversation with several faculty about building more practice-based learning experiences. So can students go out and work at a, you know, organization based in Denver? Sorry, there's construction noise in the background. I don't know where that's coming from. The joys of living in a condo. So if we were to do those practice-based learnings, I think what would be interesting is try to work with communications and external relations to feature those things that students say they want, I think potential students who want, and really showcase what's happening. I think part of our challenge is some of the amazing work that's happening in our department is not getting into the, you know, in front of the people we are trying to recruit into our programs. And so, you know, there's a communications and marketing piece that also needs to happen. And ideally we create relationships where we're working together on that. Tell the stories.
Let's see. So here's a two-part question from Lee. What is your understanding of the new budget model? And what will that mean for the department and for your vision? So if you can, your answer to the second part is contingent on whether you have enough.
Yeah, I will say I am learning, but not fully up to date. So I think obviously the new budget model has implications for the EOH budget for next year and for future years. And I am working to understand what that means. I think, you know, my understanding is it's not fully settled, and we'll discuss this at faculty meeting next week. So I think I remain in learning mode, but deeply aware that how it is settled has implications for the department. I think what is clear is there is appetite among our faculty and among the school to think about, particularly in terms of curriculum, being strategic, building programs that will pull in students, and taking a hard look at, you know, how we might collaborate across departments, how we might incentivize those collaborations, so that faculty are being compensated, you know, for for that type of work. And we're building kind of the best program for our students, but remain very much in learning mode there.
A question to be probably answered again and again.
Yes.
Let's see, from TWE, as EOH DRPH program director, can you please share your plan as to how to provide more research assistantship opportunities for students in the department?
Yes. Yes. I feel like March or January and February of each year, the DRPH directors talk about the money tree we are hoping to find. But I think there are ways to provide more student research assistantships. Ways to do this are to create a culture of building research assistantships into grants as people are writing proposals. Ways to do this are to think about faculty hires. If we have startup packages, that some of those startup packages come with promises of student law. We are both supporting new faculty and providing support for students. That will take some matchmaking to make that work well. I think, in the long term, the idea of building a strong communication and external relations plan is to potentially find some donor money for some student scholarships. And certainly there is appetite for building training grants, which can be a really powerful and stable way to provide support for students, particularly at the doctoral level. And so all of those, I think it needs to be in many approaches. We need many approaches to build the amount of scholarship and RA-ships for doctoral students.
Next, let's see. Do others have questions? We have some time left in our hour for to hear from Beth. Just give a moment to see if anybody wants to add into the chat. Well, it looks like not, Beth. So thank you to those who joined today, and thanks to Beth for.
I think Natalie put one more question in there.
Oh, she did. Okay. Mentoring philosophy for faculty and students. I guess you saw it. Thanks, Natalie.
Thanks. This is near and dear to my heart. I think every faculty member needs a primary mentor that is not their boss. I think every student needs a named faculty mentor, and then both students and faculty need to be really encouraged to think about mentoring as building a team of mentors that can meet needs. So this, the shift from the guru model where you have this one mentor you go to and they solve all your problems, to this network of mentors where one might be really great at coaching you through grant writing, and another might be a great sounding board if you're having management challenges in your lab, or another might be a great source of future jobs for students. So I think there are some really excellent mentoring resources, but I think mentorship will be key to attaining our goals of pulling in and retaining a really diverse and strong faculty and student body. So thanks for your question.
So let me ask again, give a moment to see if anyone else would like to pose something to Beth. Okay, I don't see any last minute takers. So again, thanks to all for joining, and Beth, thank you for your thoughts about the department.
Thanks all.
Thanks all. Bye. Thank you.
Bye.